itchy furry crab is generally so tired. All your humans,
grab my tail.
get alive.
That's right, you furries. It's time. Time for us to wreck you again.
Right, today we are going to be making a new custom Black Templar destroying a bunch of furries. So, I have all the bits here that I will need. Got just a bunch of random Space Marine bits, like this is a Terminator arm, cool Terminator cape from the Space Wolves, but I'm just not going to go into Terminator, it's going to go in a regular Space Marine. A lot of Terminator parts I'm using here. The Horus Heresy Terminator legs. Obviously, like power pack, and then I got all these cool little bits. Tons of purity seals. This cool Black Templar head. And then I am going to be mixing it up a bit with the older version of the Space Marine. So, first generation Space Marines, or the coolest Space Marines. So, the first thing I'm going to be doing is posing it. I made a mock base here. This is the base I am going to be using for this guy. I'm going to have him on a little hero pose, so he'll be right there in the center. And then after we have him glued together and then puttied, we're going to start making the furries around him. So, first thing we're going to be doing is drilling and pinning and gluing together. So, let's do that. And there we are. Now he is all glued together. So the next thing to do is to mix up some putty and fill up those joints. And what I'm going to be doing to use that is green stuff. So let's do it. And there we are. Now it is time to do the furries. And I'm just going to make them to where they're all ripped apart at the bottom. But yeah. That is the Black Templar. Ah, he fell. He's not connected yet. So let's hop onto the furries. Or hop into the furries. And what I'm going to be using to sculpt the furries is milliput mixed with green stuff. So I'm just going to mix those two together. And I got a bunch of these little bits that I'm going to use to help make them. I got Gene Stealer bits. So I'm going to use a combination of that and the green stuff and putty to sculpt them. So let's begin. And there we are. Got the dead furries ripped apart, ripped to shreds.
This material has been censored for your own safety. Thank you for your cooperation.
Yep, that's a furry for you. So the next thing really to do is to wait for this to dry, and then we're gonna start painting this bad boy. So let's skip to the painting bit. Ta-da! Now everything is nice and primed. So before we go and paint this beautiful black Templar, we're going to paint this base first. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to pick out all of the stones. So we're going to paint it a dark gray and then dry brush it lighter shades of gray. And we're going to start picking out all the little details, and then we'll hop over to these disgusting furries. So let's do the gray first. And there we are. Now we have all of the stone picked out. Now we got to go in there and pick out all of the metally bits. And what we're going to be using to pick out the metal bits is this. And then after I paint all of the metally bits, we're going to go back over them with this. And there we are. Now we're going to pick out all the little skulls. And the two colors that we're going to be using to do that is starting with this as the base. And then highlighting it with this. All right, got the skulls picked out. Now the next thing we're going to do, we're going to add a little bit of dirt onto the rubble just to give it kind of a variation of color. So I'm going to be using some pigment powders. We have dark earth and this. So let's do it. And there we are. Now it has a little bit more color to it. Now it's finally time to hop on to these furries. So the first thing I'm going to do with the furries, I'm going to dry brush them all a white. They kind of help bring out the colors that are already there. So I'm going to dry brush it with this. Alright, so it's officially time to pick out these furries, which they're all going to be different colors, so I will just show you all the colors I'm going to be using to paint them. So one of them will probably end up being yellow. This will be the yellow that I'm using, and I'll most likely go over this yellow with this. And then probably one will end up being orange, so I'll have this. Then obviously one will be red, so we got this. And then I'll probably go over the red with this, or actually no, not that one. I'll go over it with this one, and then we have some purple, purple one, and obviously I'm going to go back to using the white, and I'm going to be using black to help bring out details similar to my first one, as you can see here. So they're all going to be kind of in that same color scheme. So yeah, so let's just get crack-a-lackin'. And here we are. These furries have been ripped to shreds. That's what I'm talking about. Alright, so really the next thing to do is to put him onto here. And then we're going to get started with painting this bad boy. I'm actually going to glue him onto something else and then we'll paint him. So we're going to start with painting him, and the first thing we're going to pick out is the cloth bits. And what I'm going to be using for that is this as a base, and then we're going to go back and highlight it with this. Oh my gosh. There we go. And there we are. That is just for the first two coats. Now we're going to go over it with just a regular white. And the white we're going to be using is this. And there we are for right now. Now we have the cape and his little loincloth picked out in his shoulder pauldrons. Now we got to finish picking out the purity seals. And what we're going to be going over the parchment paper with is this. And there we are. Now the purity seals are picked out. Now the next thing we're going to do, we're going to pick out his joints, which his joints are going to be like kind of gray. And we're going to mix up a gray just using this black and this white. So let's do it. And there are the joints picked out, but we're going to go over the joints with one more color. We're going to go over all the joints with this. Ta-da! Now the joints are done. Now we're going to pick out the belt and the brown bits, which is really just going to be the belt. And the brown we're going to be using is this. And there we are. Now I'm going to edge highlight that brown, which I'm going to take the same brown I just used and just add a white or a tan to it just to brighten it up. So let's do it. And there we are. Now the belts are picked out. Now I'm going to move on to some red bits, which will just really be going on his shoulder pauldrons. And the red I'm going to be using is this. And then I'm going to go over that red with this. And there we are. Now we're going to do some edge highlighting on the armor itself. And the color we're going to be using is this. And there we are. Now all that black is picked out and chipped. Now the next thing to do, I'm going to pick out the bolter and I'm going to make it yellow. Make it a nice yellow bolter. So I'm going to start with this color first, and then I'm going to go for that yellow with this. And there we are. Now the next thing I'm going to pick out are the little wax seals on the purity seals. And the color I'm going to be using for that is this. Now all those are picked out. Now the next thing we're going to be painting is the furry on his back. And we're just going to be using the same purple, which is this. And then we're just going to do this base coat, and then I'm going to highlight it with mixing like a white to this purple to brighten it up. And I'm going to dry brush it over the fur. So let's do it. And there we are. Now the next color I'm going to use is a pink. And the pink I'm going to be using is this. And there we are. Now I'm going to mix up, or really, now I'm going to thin this down and then go over all the fur with it. And there we are. Now all of that fur is nice and picked out. Now we're going to move back to the bolter. I want to add some flames to it. And the color that I'm going to be using for the flames is this. And there we are. Now we're going to edge highlight the red on the shoulder pauldrons. And what I'm going to be using to highlight that is going to be this. And there we are. Now the last thing we're going to do before we move on to the silvery bits is pick out the face. If you guys want a more in-depth version of how I paint my faces, I've done plenty of videos on it, but what I normally do is I use this as the base and then I highlight it with this, and then for the eyes it's just white and black for the pupils. So let's do it. And there we are. But first, before we hop onto all the silvery bits, that's going to be the last thing we do. We need to clear coat it But before we clear coat it, I'm going to slap some decals on him, and then I'm going to clear coat him a matte finish, and then we will hop into all of the silvery and gold bits. So let's do that. And there we are. Now it's time to do all of the silvery bits. And the first color we're going to be using is this. And there we are. Now we're going to pick out some of the goldy bits. And the color we're going to be using for that is this. And there we are. Now we got to put a wash over all of the gold bits. And the wash I'm going to be using is Old Reliable. And there we are. Now we just got to highlight the silvery bits. And what I'm going to use to highlight is this. Here he is, all in his glory. That is it for this Black Templar. Really, the last thing to do is just to put blood on his sword, which I'm going to do that when I glue him to the base. So let's do that. And here we are. Now let's just add in that blood. And what we're going to be using for the blood is this. And there we are. Now that's pretty much it. He is all done. I had a lot of fun painting this figure. By the way, this is all just fun and games. Disclaimer, please do not harass the person that called me out for my humor. I'm just a big fan of Flashgitz' little short series, Black Templars versus Furries, and this is just an homage to it. A long time ago I made another figure, but this is just in response to that one little hater. So I hope you like it. Yeah, he just ripped apart a bunch of your furry kind. Yeah, so let's just hop into that little montage. I hope you guys enjoyed this.